Hi, my name is Brenda Nickel, and I am the Director of Career Services at the University of Nebraska Medical Center's College of Public Health. I'm going to share some resume tips, and by far my number one tip for students is to take advantage of all of the resources available to you on your campus, including career services. Even if they're not familiar with the technical aspects of a field you are interested in, they can help you with formatting, proofreading, wording, etc. And to be honest, you are paying tuition and fees to cover these resources, so use them. I'm going to share some basic information that will help you understand what a resume is and isn't, and its role in the job application process. The more you understand about the process, the better equipped you will be to put the right stuff on your resume. In the second part, I will share more tips for the professional experience section of the resume, which is where you really showcase what you have done. Figuring out the wording and what to include is difficult for a lot of people, so this warrants a bit more detail. I'm going to go fairly quickly through some of these basics since you can tap into your career services experts on campus. The first thing that is super confusing is the difference between a resume and a CV, or curriculum vitae. Part of this is because as a student, you interact with faculty daily, and the document they need and are most familiar with is the CV. So they will often say CV by default. So let's look at which document you need and when. A resume is appropriate at the bachelor's and master's level and is the standard document for practice settings. CVs are for research and terminal degree positions and are typically used in academic and research settings. So right now, you need a resume. And for most of you, a resume will suffice for the duration of your career. In terms of what the two documents look like, the most known thing about a CV is that they can be as long as you want, which is why some folks will go with a CV because it's hard to be succinct. However, notice that with a resume, you get to include bullets and other information about what you have done, which is not included in a CV. So in reality, you get to showcase more relevant information about yourself in a resume. The next thing to understand is the role that a resume plays in your job search. A resume is a part of your application for a job, and you are aiming to document that you have the skills and qualifications for that job. Your singular goal with the resume is to get an interview. If you are applying to another academic program, keep in mind that this will be just one document you submit. Your statement and letters of recommendation will capture more of your story and motivation, and the resume is still where you highlight the things you have done that give you experience and show what skills and training you have. A final thing to know about the process is related to the workflow of who is reading your resume. If it is a large organization, there is a good chance that an applicant tracking system is doing the first review. If you have ever filled out all of those little boxes in the online application, you know, where it says position, start date, end date, average hours per week, duties, etc., that was part of an ATS. The computer will screen out applicants who do not meet basic qualifications like type of degree or years of experience. For years of experience, it is prorated based on FTE, or full-time equivalent, not calendar time. So a student position working 20 hours per week for 12 months would equal 6 months of experience because that was a 0.5 FTE. This is part of why you want to make sure that any relevant experience, including volunteer work, is in your professional experience section so that time can get counted. The application is then reviewed by HR. So one important tip, if there are ever supplemental questions at the end of the application, make sure to answer those in detail with full sentences. Don't just copy and paste your bullets. Those answers are reviewed by a real person, an HR professional, who is confirming that your version of the experience or qualification meets their definition. Applicants that meet all of the qualifications will then be passed on to the hiring manager for review. Smaller organizations won't have all of those layers of review. So with this understanding, you can see that your successful strategy must include carefully reviewing the job description and matching the keywords as much as possible. I recommend copying the job description text and highlighting keywords, then using those highlighted words as a checklist with your resume. Go through your resume and literally check off the highlighted words when you see them in your resume. Another trick you can do is use a word cloud generator to check what words stand out in the job description and your resume. So at this point in your career, you probably will include all of your things, but as you move on, there will be a lot of things that come off if they are not directly related to that job. Now for what your resume looks like. I'm not going to review all of these details. In general, what you need to know is don't go too big or too small, and this is not the time to play with fancy fonts. You want all of your dates on the right and use other formatting sparingly. And the goal of your formatting is to make your document very easy to scan quickly. And by quickly, I mean very quickly. This is a heat map showing where recruiters' eyes went. On average, they spent less than 10 seconds doing an initial scan to determine whether they want to read more closely. And you can see that big blocks of text, like that bottom left, do not get read. Okay, now for the sections of your resume, there are 3 required sections: contact information, education, and professional experience. Whether you include those optional pieces under education would depend on space and relevance. So for example, if you have taken a class on something that is a requirement for a job, but you haven't done that thing in a job yet, including relevant coursework would be really smart. Now, this is not a list of all your courses, just the ones that help make you qualified. And you want to let them decide whether it matters that you have that knowledge from a class versus a job. From there are countless possible additional sections. You can do as many or as few of these as you would like. And again, your criteria first and foremost is relevance to the job, and second, space. So you do need to be to 1 page or 2 page. And if you go into that second page, you need to take up the whole second page. It is very common for students to include volunteer and leadership experience in your resume because so many of these really do prepare you for aspects of a job. And if you've done something that is quite substantive, so maybe it was every Thursday, every week for a year, or it's very relevant to the job, so maybe you helped write a grant or secure funding for something, you can also consider moving it up to your professional experiences section. For presentations and publications, they don't expect these in your resume, but if you have them, this is a good way to demonstrate communication skills. It's providing evidence of your skills. Honors and awards, you might need to explain if they are ones that not everybody is familiar with. For training and certifications, in environmental health, you are likely going to need some certifications to qualify for certain jobs. And so if that is the case with the job you're applying for, I would actually move this section up right under education. So it's right at the top, they see that you meet their requirements. Otherwise, this would be good to go right after your professional experience. Shadowing, that's something that is expected if you're applying for any advanced clinical degree programs. And typically they'll give you instructions if that's a requirement. If so, you need to indicate what type of shadowing, a location, and the hours. And then student projects can be included if it is a large project and demonstrates experience relevant to the job. So here's an example of how you could do that. So it's kind of formatted like professional experience with the institution, the dates, and you see there's really high impact descriptive titles of the project, and then a high impact bullet. And the other video is going to go into more detail of what a high impact bullet is. So professional memberships are always a good thing to note because it shows you're connected with the field that you are wanting to be a part of. And skills is typically the last section. Computer skills and languages are the most common types of skills to include, but some fields might have additional technical skills to highlight. Some final do's and don'ts. Do save and submit your document as a PDF, not a Word document. If they give you any instructions about how to save or name your file, make sure to follow them. That's your first chance to demonstrate that you are detail oriented. If they don't give you instructions, I suggest saving your file name as some version of your name, like last name, first initial, resume. Make sure to have people proofread. If you can get into your career services, great. But even if you can have a friend or family member proofread, because they won't be automatically fixing typos the way that you might be. And then while you're a student, I really suggest keeping a master resume with all of your experience. Just keep on listing it so that you can modify it quickly. This will help you not have to like remember details when you see something that you want to apply for. You're just going to have to like tailor it and figure out the wording. Don't include references. That is typically a separate document. Don't include an objective at the top because really there's only so many ways you can say that you want the job. If you want something instead of an objective at the top, you can include something like a summary or summary of qualifications, profile, things like that, but it's not necessary. Personal information is not something that's done in the US. There are some countries around the world that do typically include personal information. So you would want to, if you're ever applying for something in another country, you would want to look into whether that's going to be expected. And of course, grammatical errors or typos you want to avoid. And my final don't is to never use a resume template. And I know this is a tough one. It's so tempting when you haven't done this before to just Google or go into Word or wherever and find a resume template that you think looks great. And the reason why I don't suggest that is if you have not created the formatting yourself, it can be really tough to tailor and edit. And if you are informed of an opportunity and you need to get that resume in by midnight, the last thing you want to do is be stressing out over formatting and figuring out why is this line continuing to drop onto the second page and you want it on the first page. And so it really is worth figuring out the formatting on your own first and having it look the way you want it to look when you have controlled the formatting, and then you can edit it much more easily. All right, we're going to go into professional experience. After your education section, you will have a professional experience section. I recommend this label for the section instead of work experience, as it allows you to include relevant unpaid experience such as internships, student research, etc. In terms of formatting, these experiences will be listed in reverse chronological order. In other words, the most recent or current positions will be first. The first line will be in bold and will have your title aligned to the left and the date aligned to the right. The second line, not in bold, will name the organization and its location. For the dates, I highly recommend including both the month and year because it helps the reviewer know how long you did something. People worry sometimes about having a lot of short-term experiences, but at this point in your career, that's really not a big concern. They can see that you are currently a student or a new grad, so they won't expect you to have years and years of experience with each organization. Also, when you only include years, it automatically raises the question, well, how long were they actually there? Or what is this person trying to hide? And in general, you want to avoid anything that raises questions unnecessarily. Whether your title or the name of the organization goes on line 1 in bold will depend a little bit upon which will carry more weight for the position. So think back to that heat map in video 1. When someone's skimming your resume, they're going to quickly see what you have done and for how long. And you can see, or you can guess that how the words in line 1 in bold are going to stand out a little bit more. So you do want to think about whether your list of titles or your list of organizations is more relevant to the thing that you're applying for. And obviously this might change for different organizations and jobs to which you apply. The bullets are where you'll capture what you have done in these roles. For most positions, you will have between 2 to 5 bullets, depending on how many relevant things you want to include. If you are going over 5, you may be thinking too narrow for each bullet. Remember that this is not a list of every single duty you had in the role. This is framing what you did in the context of the role you are applying for. So your bullets may be more like categories. For this example here, the student did not list each individual research project they supported. Instead, the bullets highlight laboratory work, data analysis, data entry, and general research support. An exception to this rule would be federal government positions, where it is not uncommon to have 10, even 20 or 30 bullets. I'm not going to cover federal resumes here. If you are applying to something federal, please make sure to use your career services resources. The other thing you can see here is that each bullet begins with an action verb. There are lots of lists of verbs for resumes out there, so find one you like and have it handy as you compile or revise your resume. Here are some examples of commonly used verbs and better verbs to consider. Especially as students, there are probably quite a few things that you have assisted with. So really push yourself to think through, what role did you play and what is a more accurate way to capture that role? Remember to include unpaid experience in this category anytime it is something that helps make you qualified for the role you're applying for. As you move through your career, always double check your verb tenses. As you leave or conclude certain roles, those verbs need to be changed to past tense. One tip for resumes that you frequently see is to quantify whenever possible. In certain fields and career paths, it's more obvious how to do this. So for example, someone in sales can quantify their productivity in dollar amounts or customer accounts. But there are times when we can also quantify in our field. If you organize an event for a student group, can you quantify how many people attended or how many student groups collaborated on the event? If you work on a research project, you can quantify the number of researchers or faculty you support or communicate with. Or if it is a community-facing activity, how many community organizations were involved? All of these details help others understand what your version of the work has looked like. Now a word about jargon, and specifically some of the things that we always see employers wanting. So these are all good traits. That's why every employer values these things. The problem is that anyone can say these, and we don't know how true the word is for them or what their version. So like, what does this actually mean for this individual? So instead, you should show, not tell. So instead of saying you're a team player, give some examples of teams you have worked on. Simply replacing the word used with learned in that second bullet really changes the impact. So saying learned tableau, now that shows that you can see when you have a knowledge or skill gap and can learn something new to execute the work in the most effective way. So while you want to provide some key details in your bullets, you also need to be succinct. These are some of my all-time favorite bullet examples. This student could have said, manage database and analyze clinical research data, which is unfortunately something, or fortunately, I suppose, from an experience standpoint, it's something that just about every single master's level epidemiology or biostatistics student could say. So we wouldn't really know what their unique version of this has been. So instead, take a look at their bullets. Pause the video if you need to read it more closely. By quantifying the years of data, we know they can handle a large volume of data. It is clinical trial data, so they understand what is involved in those protocols and how to handle protected health information. We see computer programs in there and even some communication pieces. So we really have a stronger feel for what this student has done. So how do you know if you're providing enough details? Well, you ask yourself whether the bullet could be an item in a job description. If the answer is yes, you need to add something, because literally any other person who has been in that job could write the exact same thing. And you want them to know what your version of the activity looked like. Keep reminding yourself that this is not a list of tasks and all of the ways that you spent your time. I know that this can be tricky to accomplish. So what you do is continue to ask yourself, how and why did you do something? The how could be related to who you worked with. So either specific types of people or organizations, the software you used, certain techniques. It could be laboratory procedures, community engagement processes, etc. The why could indicate the impact you had, like the number of people trained at a workshop, or a need. So if you identified or discovered a need for something and then filled it, so maybe as a student leader, you organized a blood drive on campus. If this is an annual event that you took over, the tasks involved are different than if you realized there were no campus blood drives and your group wanted to host one. So the latter version of that would involve a lot more communication to figure out who needs to be involved, approvals needed, etc. It also implies a willingness to fill a need that you notice, which speaks towards that motivation and problem-solving characteristics that employers really value. All right, hopefully this has been helpful. Some final words of advice, because I know this is tough. Very few people love working on a resume. So if you are struggling with putting together an initial resume, or maybe you have a class assignment where you need to submit a resume, it may be helpful to go and find a job description to help you focus. Doing this could help give you some general categories of experiences to include, skills and words to use, etc. That way you aren't trying to come up with fantastic wording in a vacuum. I will also keep repeating that you should use your career services resources. Resume formatting and wording is literally something that they excel at. And if at times you are working on your resume and getting frustrated, maybe take a break and Google resume memes. Humor is always good, and this particular search result will likely make you feel less alone in the frustration. So thank you for your time and good luck.
The question was, when including one-time experiences like volunteering for a single week on a resume, what's the best way to include dates?
I would go ahead and just put the month and year. So that's going to be the easiest to understand in your actual resume. If you're encountering one of those online applications where it's a computer application with the fields that you complete, then you'll actually put the start dates and the end dates in there. And so that type of application, they'll see that it was just for one week. Now, if it's something like a spring break, I've also seen a lot of students do something really effectively of just say like spring break 2020 or something like that. And then that will be clear that it was a 1 week type of thing. If it's sometimes those experiences will involve travel, and so sometimes you'll also see folks capture it that way of like week-long service trip to Nicaragua, da 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 da.